And this is something that's always the topics that I talk about today are topics that all of us in the field of yoga have come up against several times, in our journey as yoga teachers. And it began particularly about 2 months ago when I was actually being interviewed to be part of a delegate of women entrepreneurs. And during that interview, I was asked about things such as my, the big vision I have for my enterprise. What is my bottom line? How many employees I have in my organization? And I found very quickly that although I do consider myself an entrepreneur, that I was very different from the other women delegates. I was very different in the sense that my vision was not about making millions of dollars and how many employees I would have under me. My vision was very different from everyone who was on that call that day. My vision was simply just to be the best yoga teacher I possibly can and to be the best yoga student that I possibly can. And when I asked the people who were interviewing me about whether they have ever mentored someone who's just like me, let's say an artist or a musician, who finds creative ways of staying involved in their profession while making money, I was told very bluntly that that is not an entrepreneur. So I felt that it was about time that we actually look at the field of yoga teaching and let people know what actually lies behind it. What does it take to be a yoga teacher today or a yoga professional today? And hence this presentation. Also, as a lot of you would have also experienced other yoga professionals in the field, you would find, okay, why is this? You would find that a lot of people have this notion that a yoga teacher, like an artist or a freelance musician, is simply not involved in something of much significance. That whatever they're involved in is not something serious enough to effect change beyond their spheres. So we see that a lot of people look down upon the teaching of yoga or don't give it the respect that it is due. Also, I have found that a lot of people rank a yoga teacher amongst a like hobbyist at best or a dilettante at worst, but they do not accord yoga teachers the due respect and courage and conviction that is required to turn a passion into a stable source of income. So because of these experiences that I was having, I felt that it was important that it's about time that we put all of this into a study and present it for the wider world. Now, we have to also examine the reasons why we have these notions. Why is it that such notions about yoga teachers and the field of yoga is so rampant? And there are two main kind of reasons. The first set of reasons would fall under the social reasons for why yoga is considered to be a hobby. And these reasons, the social reasons, are usually that yoga is blanketed under archaic dogma and a multitude of cultural, traditional, and religious nuances. So we see yoga, unlike other professions, comes with a lot of preconceived notions, which have their root in our cultural traditions or our traditionally held views. And therefore, people are sometimes unable to look beyond these reasons. There are also personal reasons that I came across. I found that yoga teachers themselves grapple with finding a balance between yoga teaching as imparted in the traditional context, so how it's been being taught right till now, and how it is imparted in the fitness-obsessed, consumer-driven market of today. And I found that yoga teachers sometimes grapple with a balance between these two issues. And also, if we are to look at yoga from the point of view of a profession, it is important to look at it in the context of the Indian market, particularly the evolution of the Indian market, because in that context, yoga is a very nascent profession in the way we see it today. Now, the Indian market has been a closed market until the 1980s. Then around, it was closed, but around the 1950s, there was a push to open up the markets. And we see at this time that a lot of politicians, a lot of leaders had this intent to sort of bring about an evolution in technical education, in a lot of technology that was available, just basically looking at progress for India, for the Indian masses. And because of this focus on evolution and on growth in terms of the socio-economic the strata that was there, we see that by the 1970s, a lot of the attitudes and values had changed. A lot of the pre-existing attitudes and values had changed. We see now that people were no longer impressed, or they were no longer after the government sector. Until now, the government sector had spelled some sort of promise, sort of stability, a secure income, but Indians were no longer finding that lucrative. Instead, they were becoming more experimental. They wanted not to only earn money like their parents had or their grandparents had, but they wanted to create wealth. And so that sort of changed the kind of work that they wanted to be involved in, and the kind of impact that they wanted to make, the kind of lives that they wanted to live. And we see that sort of growth has continued because in the last 25 years, the disposable income of the middle classes has steadily increased. It's increased 20-fold times in the last 25 years. And that has been the single most important change, or change which has affected the economy till now. And so at the beginning of this millennium, I would even say that India was on the brink of a huge renaissance, because everything had changed, from the way we spend our money, from what we consider as lucrative jobs, what we consider wealth, how we want to lead our lives. This is vastly different from what we had seen till now. And therefore, it was a time of huge change, a time of changed values, and that can actually be considered a renaissance for India. Now, what we're looking at is, is the fact that a yogi or a yoga teacher is also an entrepreneur. So it's important to look at the definition of what is an entrepreneur. And this definition is quite elusive, because I was not able to find any one consistent definition. The one that I found, which I thought was close to what I believe is an entrepreneur, is someone who has a vision, can convince others of this vision, and then is willing to take financial risks to realize this vision. Also, someone who thinks out of the box. So pretty much there was this kind of movement going on in the Indian middle classes. We had changed from people who had wanted stability of a government job to people who wanted to generate and create our own wealth. So all of us were actually looking at doing something different, and that is the definition of entrepreneur. Now, I also found that there were many, like through history, there have been many instances when there has been a display of entrepreneurship. And I found that Christopher Columbus, who is someone we would think of as an explorer or just as a historical figure, but actually he displayed or he defined what an entrepreneur is, and to a very large degree. If you think about Christopher Columbus, he was someone who wanted to explore uncharted trails. He wanted to explore things other people had not explored before, routes that other people had not explored before. He had no money, so he had to look for people who would fund his business venture, his voyages, and he had to also convince other people to come on board with him. And he had to convince them against all odds, because nobody really wants to be on a boat which they don't know is headed towards something, or is just going to get lost in some at sea. So Christopher Columbus is an excellent example of an entrepreneur. And I found that in the current scenario, whenever we talk about entrepreneur, we always think of startups. We always think of someone who has a lot of funding. We always think of someone who is trying to change the world, who has lofty visions. But I really feel that the definition that we have right now is very limited, and we need to sort of broaden it to also include people who are perhaps not looking at making $1 billion one day, but are looking at bringing about a change in their own right. And that is where fitpreneur comes in. So fitpreneur is basically an amalgamation of the term fitness and entrepreneur. And although we think that this is a recent phenomena, it is actually not. I found that it has actually started from the 1970s. So even back then, we had people on TV, and examples are Jillian Michaels and a lady called Lilias Folan, who even in the 70s was on American TV teaching people yoga. And at the same time, we had someone called Dhirendra Brahmachari on Doordarshan, and he had a show called Yoga Vyas, which I think is still on, which still runs. So these people, were taking something that had till now not been on TV, and they were looking at new ways of imparting the knowledge to people. So in a way, these guys were our first fitpreneurs. And then we see in 2000, Baba Ramdev on the Asta channel, he was doing pretty much the same thing. This was something that had not been done till now. And we see that he really tried to change the way things were in the yoga field at the time. And then finally, in the late 2000s, we see the rise of the YouTube stars. So now we actually see people at home shooting home videos and sharing that with the world. And this was similar to what is actually happening now. And it was sort of a dry run for the kind of programs that we have now, for the kind of workshops that we have now. The way fitness exists right now, we also saw a rise of that in the late 2000s. The only difference was that back then it was handheld cameras, phone cameras, living rooms, and now we've evolved to getting high-tech equipment, but we're pretty much doing the same thing. So the kind of evolution that's happening right now, we've already had a dry run of it in the late 2000s, but we never think about it in that way. Now, so now since we've spoken about the fitpreneur, it's important to talk about like a subset of that, which is the yogipreneur. Yogipreneur is basically an amalgamation of yogi and entrepreneur. So someone who is yogi and also does some business in the field of yoga. And this phenomena came out around the late 90s and early 2000s, where we had people quitting their stable salaried jobs to take the plunge into the world of yoga teaching. And at this time, you would see a lot of people and a lot of your friends would say, I want to follow my passion, or I want to share my love for yoga, or I want to spread the word of yoga and share it with the world. And people had this intention, to change the world and to teach yoga in a new format. The only problem was that as early as the 2000s, there were no proper systems in place that would ensure that someone could do this and for it to be sustainable. So people were basically trying new things, and there was a lot of trial and error, and we came across a lot of challenges. And I'd like to list out some of the challenges. These were the main challenges. Now, there were many challenges, but everyone I spoke to found that these were the three main challenges that they came up against. The first was reality of meeting basic living expenses and lifestyle expenses. Then people realized that it takes years to build the kind of following that ensures full group classes or even private classes for that matter. And people also realized that teaching at the local studio simply doesn't amount to a sustainable income. So these were a lot of the issues that we were facing at that time. And a lot of these issues are also current issues. And we're going to look at how we can actually bridge these challenges, or how we can actually overcome these challenges. But before we move on to that, it's important to understand history of yoga teaching, a very brief history for the purposes of this presentation. People, yoga has been being taught for centuries. But when did yoga teachers actually start to think about going beyond, their boundaries, their, maybe national boundaries, or beyond their little spheres and go beyond that? So we see in 1893, as far back as 1893, Swami Vivekananda went to Chicago for the Parliament of Religions. In 1911, we had Jiddu Krishnamurti traveling to Europe. And then around 1934, things start to change. This is where we see foreigners, Westerners, traveling to India and wanting to learn with the Indian masters in their own countries. So in 1934, Indira Devi and Vanda Scaravelli both made their way to India and somehow got permission to learn under T. Krishnamacharya. He's the father of modern yoga. Then in 1954, we saw B.K.S. Iyengar actually traveling abroad. Now, this was a sharp contrast. This is where we actually see an entrepreneurial spirit like actually emerging. Because B.K.S. Iyengar's teacher himself, T. Krishnamacharya, not only did not travel to teach Westerners, but when Indira Devi and Vanda Scaravelli came to him, they said, well, I don't teach, I won't teach foreigners, I won't teach women. And he, I believe, made them just wash the floors of the shala for about 2-3 months before he even allowed them into class. So we see B.K. Iyengar, had learned under this sort of environment, but in 1954, he decided that he himself would make the journey to his students and teach there. By the 1960s, we see spiritual tourism coming into India. Ram Dass, the Beatles, many people came in search of spirituality to India. So now we see people are actually drawn to India to learn from the source itself. And finally, in 1974, Pattabhi Jois, who was also a student of T. Krishnamacharya, he decided to finally make his first voyage to teach. So this was sort of like the teaching tours, the early teaching tours. Now we know teaching tours is very glamorous events where there are multiple countries that teachers go to and they have their own groupies. But back then it was the lone teacher going against colonialism, against a lot of the racism that was prevalent at the time, going against all of that and going to teach a student in the comfort of their own homes. So around 1974, which is when Pattabhi Jois actually decided to travel, we see that a lot of Western students had decided that they wanted to teach yoga and that they felt that it was their responsibility to teach yoga in the way that their gurus had taught them. And they also felt that they should be able to support themselves, so that they should be able to support themselves financially through the teaching of yoga. The first instance we see of teacher's training certification granted to a Westerner is in 1972. David Williams is today a very famous teacher of Ashtanga Yoga. And in 1972, he received a 6 months yoga teacher's certification at the Swami Geetananda Ananda Ashram in Pondicherry. And it was actually David Williams with his partner who sponsored Pattabhi Jois's first trip to the US. So we see now it's taking shape, the idea that teachers can travel to their students, to teacher training tours, teacher training certifications. All of this has started to take shape. And so we see that there is a demand also for yoga teacher certifications. And wherever there is a demand, there should also be a supply in any evolving market. And the supply for these teacher training certifications was something that was provided by a teacher who's infamous now. He's very shrewd, very clever, and very famous. And a lot of you, if you watch Netflix, you would be able to guess who this person was. He is effectively the first person who came up with the idea of the teacher training courses as we know them today, as we see them today. And this guy was none other than Bikram Chaudhry. So what Bikram Chaudhry did was basically he commodified the whole Guru Shishya Parampara. So he said, if you give me a fee, I will authorize you to teach in my tradition. You would learn his script and be allowed to teach classes. And once you graduate from his teacher's training course, you would also pay him royalty. And this was very effective. He had a fleet of Rolls Royces after he actually implemented this business structure. And when I was doing this research, I was wondering that Bikram Chaudhry was around the same time when he implemented this teacher's training. There were a lot of other teachers who were also authorizing their students to teach. So we know that B.K.S. Iyengar was doing that. We know that Pattabhi Jois was doing that. We know that a lot of other teachers were also doing that. But the way Bikram Chaudhary managed to bring this about was phenomenal. He's a phenomena. His teacher training courses are something that we still talk about. And he really did take over the world. So I would like everyone here, especially if you're a yoga teacher, to think about why it was so. Arguably, the Iyengar lineage or the Ashtanga lineage is more respected, is more revered. And Bikram Chaudhary, at this point in time, is a fugitive from the US government. But yet he managed to create this sort of impact and to bring this change into the market. Why is that? And it would be interesting to hear a few of you, of your opinions on that. Okay, now it's also important to think about and to look at yoga teaching today. If you're a yoga teacher today, so actively teaching yoga, making your money, your living off of teaching yoga, you are a studio owner. Or you're an independent yoga teacher. So a studio owner, to be a studio owner was once upon a time everyone's dream. You know, if you were a wannabe yoga teacher, you wanted to own your own studio. It would be your haven. It would be a place where you could teach like you wanted. You could, you know, teach unadulterated yoga, real yoga. And this was very aspirational for a lot of studio owners. However, over time, we realized that it was not so simple. It was not about doing yoga all the time or being involved in doing yoga all the time. It was actually more about analyzing marketing strategies, hiring and training, quality control, meeting deadlines, etc. Pretty much what entrepreneurs in any other business do. So we started to realize that it wasn't so straightforward to own a studio. It actually required a lot of skills other than just being a good yoga teacher or knowing your yoga. And we quickly found out that even as an independent teacher, it was just as complex as being a studio owner. You were now responsible for your own marketing. You're now responsible for your own strategies, for your own keeping track of your own finances, your own students. So all of that, you know, in recent years, we've realized that teaching yoga may be looked at as you know, someone who has a hobby or someone who's very bendy and flexible, but actually the teaching of yoga and creating a sustainable career out of it draw upon a lot of intellect, a lot of experience, a lot of maturity, which is indispensable if you want to make a sustainable career out of teaching yoga. And also we should look at the yogipreneur today. And the reason I wanted to look at that is because of the coronavirus. Now, this was the first time it was happening in 100 years, and it changed life as we know it. And it changed the yoga world as we know it. Overnight, we saw that we had to go online, and teachers who had till now resisted the urge to be on social media, they found that that was the only way to connect to people. Now, this came along with a lot of challenges, a lot of intrinsic challenges, a lot of challenges in terms of technology, but I have observed that a lot of the teachers, they've really risen up to it. A lot of the teachers who've continued to teach, they've really risen up to the challenge. And that has made me feel more than ever that perhaps yoga teachers are some of the best entrepreneurs that we have today. So these are some of the things that happened when the coronavirus hit us and our lives. We realized, a lot of teachers realized that they might not be technologically interested in technology or technologically sound or capable, but that their patchy internet and the space constraints were real, and that they had to figure out how to teach despite these constraints. And we saw a lot of yoga teachers do this creatively, very intelligently, and we saw them doing it seamlessly as well, with help from other people in their community, but they rose to the challenge. We saw teachers who modified their classes to suit an online audience. They modified the way they taught to suit an online audience. And I'm not talking about teachers who are very young. I'm talking about teachers in the 70s, teachers who were like in 75, 80s. For them, the laptop was never a big part of their lives. Yet we saw them rise up and really take the challenge and triumph actually over that challenge. We saw these same teachers increase their engagement on social media, but we saw them doing it in a very conscious way, in a very original way. As teachers, we understood that now the audience that we had, the pool of students that we had, would be of all ages, they would be of all nationalities, of all fitness levels, and a lot of teachers started to modify their classes in a very creative manner to serve various kinds of people, a multitude of different kinds of people. And we also see in the yoga world that the number of collaborations for workshops increased. We saw online yoga festivals doing really well. We saw online yoga classes doing really well. The interesting thing to note is that if you look at the market right now, you will see that a lot of big, well-funded, large chains, yoga studio chains or fitness studio chains, they've actually had to shut down. These guys came with, millions of dollars of funding, and they actually had to shut down because they weren't able to survive in this changing market, in this unpredictable market. But if you look at the teachers that niche yoga teachers, small yoga teachers, independent yoga teachers, these guys have really thrived. A lot of the yoga teachers, they have seen 100% increase in the number of students in their class attendance. They've seen about 500% increase in the personal students. With that, there has been an increase in their incomes as well. And I'll go back to what I said initially about yoga teachers being some of the best entrepreneurs right now, because it's also about the survival of the fittest. The coronavirus was unprecedented. Nobody could predict it. But who came out really strong? It was that niche independent yoga teacher. It was that studio who very quickly decided that, okay, we really need to set it up, to do online classes. They could maintain that kind of relationship with their students. They decided to go on social media. So they really evolved quickly, and there was a huge learning curve. So I found that to be one of the most important learnings that we should have from the current scenario, the coronavirus scenario. Now I'm almost out of time, so I'd like to quickly talk about a few learnings that I've had, because I've had the privilege of speaking to a lot of teachers who I personally admired from afar, and I had a chance to speak to them about their journeys and observe also the similarities between their journeys. And these are the things that I found out about the teachers who I respect and who've created sustainable careers for themselves in the space of yoga. I found that all the teachers had a drive to succeed, and they had the intelligence to support that journey. So it is not only about being able to do asanas, you have to use your brains, you have to cultivate your intellect. I also found that these teachers had the capacity and maturity to shift between the different roles of artist, teacher, student, business owner, and entrepreneur whenever needed. So in a way, flexibility of the mind and not just flexibility of the body. None of the teachers I spoke to thought that teaching yoga was a side business or an easy income stream. And above all, these teachers had an unshakable belief in the philosophy of yoga. So they were all on the path that they believed in and that they intrinsically had a calling for. And since I learned a lot from teachers I admire and respect, I also have a few learnings for aspiring teachers. So you should maintain a regular practice that you feel supported by physically and mentally. All the teachers I spoke to, they actually have this. So it's, I hear very commonly that I don't have time to practice, and I understand the constraints, but it is important to maintain some sort of regular yoga practice. You have to set aside quality time for your own learning, not only about the yoga, but about business. And you have to be open-minded about what you're learning, about different lineages, different teachers. Also, I found that most of the teachers who had sustainable yoga careers had already worked somewhere else. So they had an experience of a professional setup. So they came with a lot of experience of that, a sense of responsibility, a sense of professionalism, how to conduct yourself, how to come across as professional. And they've also spent a lot of years being students of yoga before they decide to settle down for a life as a yoga teacher. And I found that that most of the teachers, even the really old teachers, so from personal experience, I can tell you that B.K. Iyengar used to tell everyone who used to come to him to go work somewhere else, or at least to go in and study, do a master's, do a PhD, before you decide to come and become a yoga teacher. So that's very important. Seek out senior teachers who you respect and attend class. Remember, evolution doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so if you want growth, you will have to collaborate with others and interact with other people. Also, a very peculiar problem I came across was this burgeoning of online TTCs. And this has made a lot of yoga teaching aspirants feel that yoga is now that much more simple. So I personally spoke to a girl who, who wanted to know a little bit about the field of yoga. And she had just finished a 15-day online TTC, which was about 2-3 hours a day. And she had started to teach 1 or 2 students online, and she was moving out of India, and she was asking me for some tips on how to become a better yoga teacher. And I told her, well, now that you're moving away to a country where there's no social distancing, maybe you can start to volunteer at a studio, learn under a teacher, actually understand how the teaching of yoga exists outside the laptop situation. And I was appalled by her answer. And her answer was that, no, I'm going to be a great yoga teacher, but I'm only going to teach before work, after work, and I'm only going to teach online. And so I think that this is a view that's rampant, and I disagree with it, because a lot of the yoga teachers who have done really well during the online teaching are those people who have also taught offline and have had significant experience teaching offline. So we must not think that an online TTC and online teachers, online students will be the future of yoga. Also remember, a good teacher is the result of a long process which takes time. So again, plan intelligently. Intellect is something that I cannot emphasize enough, because every single teacher I came across was super focused, super intelligent, educated, and speaking to them really showed me that it's not just about being good at asana. You really have to have an inquiring mind, an analytical mind. So never underestimate that. Spend time on something besides just your asana practice, or just your just the kind of classes that you take. So I'd like to end, and I hope I'm within time. So I'd like to end with the last paragraph of my paper. And my paper is actually available for everyone to read, but it is a long paper. So the last paragraph states, the business and the personal sadhana are 2 sides of one coin, and as such must evolve together. It is easy to get carried away with the business of yoga, especially because the business pays our bills. The middle ground can be found in the teachings of Vedanta. The Shastras encourage us to look at the rose and its thorns with acceptance. An aversion to the thorns shouldn't be the reason to abandon the beauty of the rose. So tyaga of materialistic wealth through which we sustain our life is not the answer. The answer is to face the limitations of our situation and to accept the drawbacks, if any. Yoga philosophy is our true north, and we must not lose sight of it as we create fulfilling, sustainable teaching careers for ourselves. Now, my email is pragya.bhatt@gmail.com. I know that this is a topic that a lot of yoga teachers will have something to share about and to tell me about. So please do get in touch with me if you have any information that I could include in my paper. It is a work in progress. Those of you who want to read the paper in the way it exists right now can go on my website. There's a downloads link menu, and you can actually download the paper and read it. And at this point, we have a little bit of time. If anyone has any questions for me or any comments, please feel free to kind of unmute yourself and share.
Thank you so much, Pragya. I think you gave a very, actually, although you keep saying that you're taking a lot of time, but actually it's what you have managed to do is take a vast topic and present it in a very concise and organized manner, a lot of clarity. And I would like to, if anybody wants to speak, I think we're a small enough group that we can all we can all take our own understanding and please speak and give your ideas, your opinions, questions, comments.
It is a very vast subject, the teaching of yoga itself. I mean, there can be a whole chapter on that itself. There can be a whole book on what is a yogipreneur and the challenges that we face. But I feel that even 20 pages of the paper wasn't enough to sort of put everything that I've learned. And I'm continuing the research. But yeah, for the purpose of the time that we had, this was as concise as I could make it.
Beautiful. You can download Pragya's paper.
Yes, it's available on my website. And yeah, I think it's very relevant to everyone who's teaching yoga right now. And especially when I was holding interviews with like you, for instance, and the other people who are on the panel, I found so much personal engagement. Like it is a topic which is very close to our hearts, and I found so many people, really coming out and sharing a lot of stories. So these are the kind of stories I'm looking for, and the kind of experiences that I'm looking at highlighting through the paper.
Wonderful. Can we have the audience now? Wait first. Yeah, so if you'd like to download information, download Pragya's paper, it's available. The information is available on the chat. Otherwise, you can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Hi, Pragya. This is Anshu here. First of all, congratulations. I really enjoyed your presentation. It's so informative and so thought-provoking. So is this part of some academic study, or is it just like a study that you've done by yourself, for yourself?
Yeah, I've done it by myself and for us, us as yoga teachers, because I feel that there's so much misconceptions about the work that we do. And I feel that, all the yoga teachers that I know, we all come from a different sort of background. Some of us are engineers, corporate, in the corporate startup. And we've all had this journey where, initially, like a lot of people say, why would you quit that to do yoga? Because people think that it's either, not something which is financially viable, or, you're too smart for it, too qualified for it, or it's not what people do in the cities. It's something that people, people who want to give up everything do. So I wanted to shed light on it and start that discussion, especially on the wiki platform, because I feel that there are so many notions, and there has to be some sort of correction done on those notions. So that's why it's just I'm doing it with the help of everyone I've reached out to. Yeah.
Wow, it's amazing.
Thank
you.
Okay, so I'm going to add a question while we're waiting for others to find their voice. Yes, I would like to, because as you know, I run an NGO which serves in the yoga community. Now, where does that fit into being a yogipreneur, including all of the members of our team who are who are involved in this? And how much of society should be involved in supporting such endeavors, or how should society be involved?
Yeah, I think throughout history, and that's why I made a point of going into the history of the Indian markets, the Indian economy, and then came to the history of teaching yoga. We've seen that with any kind of change, any kind of progress that has happened in society, in the economy, has happened because people have evolved, because we have been very open and flexible with our mindsets. And so for people now, for entrepreneurs now, especially young, confident, driven people who want to be in the field of yoga, it's important to be supported by a lot of your friends, by a lot of your family members, and that support sometimes I feel is not so forthcoming, and especially if you if you are somebody who already has a job which is really well paying, or which is considered very prestigious, So I don't find that sort of encouragement forthcoming in the way things exist right now. It will change, but in order for it to change, we have to start looking and demanding that kind of support. So how should they be supported? I think the support should start there, from the mindsets of people trying to have these conversations. And what was your other question about?
Well, can I also can I also bring in another topic? And where does the government, especially in India, what is the government's role in promoting
Yeah.
yoga as an entrepreneurship or an enterprise?
Yes, I think the Indian government has been wonderful. It's the first government who said, okay, let's put the spotlight on yoga. And I know there are many schemes and many acts that the government is trying to pass to support yoga teachers financially as well. So in terms of getting loans is easier for yoga teachers. There's a tax exemption for yoga teachers. Yoga teaching, the teacher training courses are being offered at subsidized rates. So there's a lot of encouragement in that way. The fact that we have a department of Ayush, and it in itself shows that there is a support for holistic health, for alternative therapy, and the approach is also scientific in nature. So we're not saying that, okay, yoga is great because it's been in our history and our culture forever. We are saying that that there are studies and that we want to conduct studies about the tangible benefits of a yoga practice. So I think the government, that's one way to really boost support for yoga.
Hey, Pragya, I have a question.
Yeah, hi, Mida.
So is there, in the study that you did, are there any lessons for students and maybe society at large to support yogipreneurs?
For society at large, I think that would go back to like what Soumya was asking. There has to be a change in the mindset, that this is not just something that's a hobby, and that these people are not just involved in, stretching a little bit in the park. It is not just that. I think if we change our mindsets to that and look at yoga also as a very scientific field to go into, where we're doing research, where we're doing study of anatomy, where you're studying history and culture and philosophy. I think that's where it would actually begin. I think students of yoga should also endeavor to look at it in a deeper way. I feel a lot of students who come to yoga just think, okay, I want to be flexible, that's why I'm coming to yoga, or I'm not flexible, therefore I cannot go to yoga. So there's a lot of this black and white kind of approach to the practice. But I think students need to remember to take yoga as any other philosophy with an open mind, because it is such a vast philosophy. So we must not forget the depth that this practice has to offer. We must not forget that when we enroll for a yoga class. We need to somewhere remember that there's a lot of culture, traditions associated with it. And so therefore we must have some sort of respect for it, even when you're just enrolling for a yoga class. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Raji has a question. She says, how do we make yoga accessible to all? I feel fitness and yoga, because of recent limelight, has become costlier.
So there are two ways of looking at this, and I think one way is just to say, okay, well, it's come in the limelight, and that's why it's become more expensive. But I would also look at it in a different way. I think that it's become more expensive because now yoga teachers have started to take themselves more seriously. We've started to enroll for courses that cost money. We've started to look at investing in our own careers, in ourselves as yoga teachers, and that requires money. That doesn't come for free. So I think the good yoga teachers, they are looking at their pricing in that way. And at this point in time, a lot of the good teachers are very expensive, but you do find a lot of good teachers who are, who are just volunteering, or who are not supporting themselves, through their yoga, through their yoga teaching. So how do we make yoga accessible to all? I think at this now, particularly with the coronavirus, I think it is accessible. And as far as the cost is concerned, we need to like really broaden the way we look at the fees that teachers charge. You know, we must not forget that teachers also have to take care of themselves. They have to pay rent. They have children. So we have to look